Well, hello, everyone. Thanks. Kind of you to drop in. All right, we have a few things to get through. Actually, some interesting discussion. Oh, I'd like to go ahead and get going. Rao, are you ready for the tech update?
Yes, I am. I do want to say that today, in addition to my tech update, which will give an overview, Nutzipper is going to do a little bit of a deep dive. I don't think it'll be very long, but he'll do a little bit of a deep dive in terms of the kinds of changes that we're working on in the leaderless block merge, so that the community has an appreciation for all that is going on. So, because sometimes in the debrief, we tend to be just hitting the highlights, not necessarily opening the curtain too much, but today there'll be a little bit of that, so people understand what all we are working on within the leaderless block merge space. So with that, let me share my screen. Let's see, is Nutzipper here or not yet? But in any case, hopefully he'll get here soon if he's not here.
I'm here.
Okay, good. All right, I think you see my screen. Welcome to Community Update 194. I think this is large enough, but anyways. So there's not a whole lot of change with the mainnet and the test nets, the block merge testnet and the regular testnet. There is, however, I think Gurinder will be working on updating the observers on the mainnet to the 0.12.3 version, and that's the one that has a PR from Will to kind of try to alleviate the tuple space mismatch error that we were seeing. And the way of alleviating is just to try and see if we run the replay a couple more times before the node has to exit or do something like that. See if the problem goes away by multiple replays. So that's the PR that's been in there and was being tested in the test nets without any problem. So now we're going to update the observer nodes on the mainnet with that. And if that's all stable and fine, we'll probably update the validators with that. Now, related to that, there is another, there are a couple more activities that are going on. Will has put in, the 0.12.3 does not have any debugging code. 0.12.3 just tries to alleviate the tuple space mismatch error by doing multiple replays or a couple of additional replays. But he has a separate PR and running code locally to see with the debugging code to see if we can actually identify the source of the error for the tuple space mismatch error. Because in the past, it was occurring once in a rare while, I would say probably it happened only 3 times since the start of the mainnet. But in the recent past, when we were doing a bunch of small transactions on the mainnet, looks like we ran into that one more time. So it's time to address this and try to understand what's going on with that. And separately, Gurinder is also running it on some networks to see if we can pressure test the network with a lot of transactions to see if we can make the tuple space error happen on a more reliable and faster basis. So those are all the things that are going on around debugging that particular issue. Beyond that, Tomislav is back last week, and the team is reviewing the recent changes for the leaderless block merge. And Nutzipper is going to go over those in a little bit more. And he actually has contributed this section 7 or bullet 7 here with a lot of explanation as to what all we're working on. So I'm not going to cover that because he's going to cover that. But overall, the team is working through these changes and figuring out if these design changes are fine, or if there are any implications that the whole team can think about, and perhaps if there is any rethink that's needed on any of these things. That kind of work is going on. There's a lot of discussion and prioritizing and first resolving any impacts of all of this stuff. That's one part. The other part is really stabilizing the code where it is now and rewriting a bunch of tests, as well as completing implementation of the design changes, because not everything that's listed here is completely implemented yet, but that's being worked on. Nutzipper is working on that mostly. And then for the team will be, once the tests are rewritten and everything is passing, the team will take the time to make sure everything is working as expected. So that's the overall scope of what's going on with the leaderless block merge. Dennis is continuing to make progress on his Radix tree implementation. So I think that eventually will get rolled up into the hard fork 2 based on the schedules the way they're looking like right now. And Gurinder, in addition to this tuple space mismatch error, he's also working on the testing the LLVM network, like I said. Well, actually, I did not say this. So he is testing the LLVM network to identify any issues that are showing up either when the network has been running for a while or in the start and restart of the network and things like that. So he's working through that and then providing that information to the team so that it can be fixed. So at this point in time, the LLVM testnet is still unstable, but basically the team is working to find and fix the problems one by one. And there's the other work that I spoke to. So that is what I wanted to cover. Before I hand it over to Nutzipper, does anybody have any questions or comments? Over to you, Nutzipper. Do you want me to leave this on, or do you want to share your screen?
Thanks, Ro. Yeah, I think I would share.
Okay, I'll stop sharing.
Yes, I just want to again expose this picture as I've shown on one of the debriefs recently, and it looks like these, like the idea of state finalization. It's bear lots of fruits. I want to talk briefly about some of them. For ones who are interested, you might look into the RVote document. There is something on the 7th clause, and I just want to mention what these changes might bring to the user experience. So now in our state, we're only storing validated part of the DAG, which is not that good, because actually what you need is a view of the most recent state of the network, right? And eventually you come to a conclusion that to be able to maintain the most recent state of the network, you don't need to replay blocks, which means that, for example, this is the tip of the DAG. There might be like very deep iceberg beneath. But the only thing that you need is to start with the latest messages and start pulling messages through justifications. Eventually, you will find this finalization fringe of the messages that are finalized. This is your scope. You know that everything which is beneath is underneath is finalized, and only these actually matters. By this scope, you can detect all kinds of offenses. For example, equivocations can be easily detected by having this scope. Previously, we had lots of problems with the detecting equivocations and that's why previously Casper Casper was single-threaded, because you could not detect equivocations otherwise. With this approach, you can see that if in your scope there are two messages conflicting from the same sender, the sender is equivocating. Another thing that brings your lots of good news is that when you split observing, so following the network, with validation, so building a state, is that you can just run your client, Casper client, and follow the network. You don't need to replay blocks, because if you are not bonded validator, it doesn't make sense. You might replay them only if you want to know if network as the whole is not cheating. But if network as the whole is cheating, then like you have a problem. You cannot do anything with that. So you can only run a Casper client, only verify signatures of blocks, and find a way for your deploy to be finalized. Find the moment at which your deploy is finalized. Then another approach to validation, which we are trying to establish now, is that validation is completely separate of observations. So observation maintains you the most recent state of the DAG. You need to validate block, so replay block. So compute a state of the blockchain only if you're going to add new changes, if you're a bonded validator. And this gives us also a nice view to detect lazy validators. I won't go into that right now. But what's very exciting, particularly for me, is that Tomislav in the past has been talking about that we can have different routes for different data structures. For example, under the way is a work to be able to have a separate route in our history, in our try, that will manage RVotes. So RVote balances will be handled by a different route. And this means that you can just start a node with the flag that, okay, I won't validate only rev balances. I don't care about anything else. And you can actually have many such validators running in your node. You can run validator for rev balances, validator for your data structure that you want. So this is the way how we can enable light clients of many, many different ways. So I think, let me stop here. It's a lot of new stuff. I guess if someone is interested, I'm happy to provide more information in offline in Discord. If anyone have questions or anyone understood something.
Well, first of all, I appreciate your presentation. You're getting much closer to the initial spec that Vlad and I were driving to. So, yeah,
Good to know.
you're carving away a lot of the extra stuff that the previous dev team layered on top of what should be a relatively simple.
Indeed, indeed.
Yeah. So I appreciate you digging in and getting closer to what the mathematical intentions are. So
Thanks. Good to know.
All right. Any other questions for Nutzipper or Rao?
I have a small question about the light node. Does it mean that at some point you'll be able to run a lightweight node in a browser? Like how heavy would it be?
In a browser, well, you just need basically to verify the signatures of blocks and run a Casper on your scope. So let me just briefly, all you need is having the latest messages. You need to populate this DAG, you need to have justifications, and you need to run a Casper on this DAG. This Casper will find you a fringe. And this is it, basically. You know that everything which is behind is finalized.
So it
should not be a very heavy task.
All nodes are light is essentially what Nutzipper is saying, because finalization is, marching steadily forward. Like the idea of light node versus heavy node has to do with proof of work, which goes all the way back to the beginning of time, right? That's the heavy node is doing all the heavy lifting of, going all the way back to the dawn of time and marching forward. And light nodes are not doing that, right? So here we don't ever go back to the dawn of time, or the dawn of time is whatever the finalization fringe is. Does that make sense?
I think also light node in the sense that we can validate only partial state. So if you are interested only in some state which is holding rev balances, you can only validate this part of the state and not replay everything else. This is what makes it light. But in general, like the lightest client is just a Casper client, which is computing finalization, which is observing justifications and computing finalization. Then you know that everything that is below is finalized, and then you can query like real nodes with the deploys, like what is there, what's actually finalized. But you can do what you can do in a very light way is to follow the network and see what is finalized and what's not.
Very good. Thank you. Good question. Anything else? Okay, over to you, Ian. You have some governance demo to show.
Sure. Let me share a screen. Okay. So I'm just going to browse to vote.rchain.coop. And here we have the information about our annual meeting, which takes place on October 24th, Sunday at 7 p.m. Pacific. And it's that same time every year. So mark your calendar. So although the annual meeting is Sunday night, voting begins tomorrow. So on this page, you can see all the information about registering to vote, the meeting agenda, the candidates. But let's do a little demonstration. Let's do a little demonstration of voting. So I'm going to click here, RVote on testnet. Okay, so here we have a demonstration ballot. And when you first browse to the ballot, you'll see it's empty. So the first thing you have to do is to sign in, and you sign in with the rev address that you have registered for voting. So let's see if this works. I'll click sign in. My MetaMask comes up. I'll log into MetaMask. And I see a message here, verified registered voter. So that means that my voting rev address has already been submitted to the co-op, and so I'm on the list of rev addresses that is permitted to vote in the election. So we have a little walkthrough here if you need a little extra help, but I'm going to skip this for now and go right into voting. So on this demo ballot, we're voting for different computer scientists. We have Robin Milner, Whitfield Diffie, John Conway. Are you familiar with Barbara Liskov?
I am indeed, yes.
Okay, well, if anyone has any question to find out more about any of these candidates, you just click, and we have Wikipedia pages on each of these. And this is live right now, so anyone can go to Vote RChain Co-op, and it'll work for you if you have already registered your rev address for voting. And the way this thing actually operates is for each of these options, for abstain and support, there's a corresponding rev address that a little bit of dust is sent to. So from your wallet, a little bit of dust gets sent to, let's give an example. So if I vote for Linus Torvald, click here. If you notice at the bottom of my screen, a rev address changes. I'm going to click back, and you'll see at the very bottom of my page that the rev address is changing. So if I click here, you see at the bottom of my screen the rev address ending in MSCH. That would be an abstain vote for Linus Torvald. And if I click the yes vote, then it changes to PYM8. So this is pretty simple. Each vote corresponds to a different rev address. As you click, you create a new deploy. So here are all my votes. It's a little contract here, and I can click sign and submit. I'll just go ahead and do that. And I can sign the transaction, and I've just voted on testnet. And up here, it's checking the result. This will be a minute or so before it's registered. So that's how we vote. And a little bit more under the covers, I can show you, let's see, to register your rev address. In your notice of annual meeting, the email that you received, you have a unique form address where you can go in and plug in a rev address here. And when you click submit, you will have updated the rev address that you're going to use for voting. And you should also get an email confirmation that you've registered.
Excuse
what we
me,
do-
isn't it too late for people to change their rev address?
Up until midnight Pacific tonight. And then tomorrow morning, we will go in and we'll collect the rev addresses of everyone who's registered. Here's everyone who's registered so far.
Yeah, so,
And we'll deploy all of these addresses as under a URI. So all of these rev addresses right now are an object which is on the blockchain. So I'll just update to, I'll add in whatever updates we have for tomorrow's vote. Also, the ballot is another object. So this was deployed earlier today under this address. So you can see for each of the nominees, Susan Graham, there's a yes address where dust would be sent. There's an abstain address where dust would be sent. Same with Satoshi Nakamoto, yes and abstain. And the last step here is after people have sent in their voting rev address, we're going to fund all of these wallets with a little bit of dust to offset the transaction fee of your vote. And to do that, we have a little script. So here's where earlier today, I sent one rev to everyone who's on the list. So you can see this massive deploy with hundreds of rev addresses here. And
That's what it was on testnet.
yeah, all on testnet. And just as a reward for your patience and watching the demo and a show of generosity, I'm going to send another, I'm going to repeat this deploy and send another whole testnet rev to everyone who has registered. So I'll do that now, deploying. I sign it and we'll just wait for a result. This is because this is hundreds of transactions. This script actually takes a few minutes to complete. But when it does, you'll be able to go to testnet, check your voting rev address, and you'll see your prize for watching this demo. Any questions?
Yeah, I have a question. For the rev addresses, can we generate a rev address from anywhere?
Yes. Yeah,
Okay,
all that matters is that you register it with the co-op so that we know that it's yours, that it's you voting. And you don't want to share that rev address with so it's your rev address, you have the private key. You just don't want to lose that private key. Any rev address, new, old, doesn't matter. Just make sure it's registered with the co-op.
You say you want a revolution.
New addresses are still accepted. Like if we've not registered an address before, we can still register
Up until midnight tonight.
Right. Just make sure to use the link. So everyone has a unique link for registering their rev address, and you can find that link in your notice of annual meeting that was emailed to every member. Just don't give that link out to other people, because then they'll be able to register their rev address in place of you and steal your vote. So keep your link private.
Yeah. Very good. Any questions? Any other questions for Ian?
Yeah, and so this is up and live right now. If you go to the Vote RChain co-op, you'll see lots of instructions, and there are also some some demos and blog articles that that show you how everything works. And if you want to take a deeper dive, it's all there.
Yeah. And each of those features are important, right? So it's important that everyone sees the same ballot, right? It would be easy in an online setting to show some part of the populace one ballot and another part of the populace a different ballot. So the fact that the same ballot is at the address and everyone can compare their ballots if they are so inclined. This is part of the election integrity. Likewise, you can inspect how you are what the interface is going to render as a cast of your vote, right? So that's the other reason why Ian was showing those things. This is again a part of election integrity. You can investigate that, and then finally the third piece of the election integrity is, of course, that since the votes are all on chain, everyone can check for themselves and verify that what the co-op report says the election results are in fact the election results. So those are the three sort of pillars of election integrity here.
I have a question about the time of the meeting. It's scheduled for the October 24th and then 7 p.m.
7 p.m. PDT, that's correct, yes. So apologies, It's very difficult to find a time that works for everybody.
Yeah, but there's certain times that works. Like this meeting is scheduled and everybody can appoint.
Sort of, it's terrible for our Chinese members, as an example.
Yeah, I think HJ made a suggestion of 7 a.m. Instead of 7 p.m. and maybe that is 7 a.m. could be a better time. But that's something for now. I think
we're not gonna change it at this late date. But if people want a different time for these meetings, that's why you get involved in the co-op. Get involved. Make your points heard. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there are lots of deadlines for anything to do with the annual meeting, because we're working off of some older laws and regulations from Washington State. They were written for postal mail, and so this kind of governance moves a little bit slowly, but that's why we only have it once a year.
Indeed.
So there are no important issues to discuss on the meeting?
And there will be Jackie Silbernagel, our accountant, will be presenting the financials. I'll give the state of the co-op address, and then the floor is open for members to discuss anything that comes up.
Understood.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question. So when will the final ballot be published?
Sometime on Thursday Pacific time.
Okay.
Any other questions about that? Awesome. Daryl, are you ready for the weekend review?
Daryl's car died. He's picking up his new electric car. And the week has been fairly light. And we don't have notes from the governance call on Thursday. I don't know if Rao wants to summarize that.
We didn't have a tech governance call on Thursday, and I think
we were discussing the voting and stuff at the regular governance meeting. Nothing was decided.
Right. Yeah.
And then we had the the DApp developers meeting where we reviewed the Rolang tutorial. We continue reviewing that. We're going through the whole thing and recording the results to see where that can be improved. And then Saturday, we did not meet. Now, I did not make the Casper stand up.
I'll give a little review of that, so no worries.
Okay, and not much else. And then I guess in the members meeting today, we discussed the how we can improve the IOB process and get better better form, better quality and more well-formed IOBs into the process. And well, we're deferring that to the governance committee to develop a template for creating those and a process, defining a process for handling them and discussing them. And that brings us to now.
Thank you, Jim. I appreciate you stepping in to fill Daryl's shoes. Any questions for Jim about the week in review? Okay, then. I will mention a couple of things about the Casper stand-up and other opportunities that have shown up. So one is, I know that a lot of people have been interested in debugging for RChain. I know Bill Kunj, for example, has expressed an interest in developing developer tools. And I want to point out something that I realize I've been remiss in pointing out because, you know, again, I've been swimming in this stuff for a long time, and I don't remember what's obvious and what's not obvious. But if you go back to the original paper that I wrote out, let's see, here it is. So I wrote this out for Vlad and Vitalik in 2015. I'll just do a quick screen share. So these are just some notes on how you could do metered execution. And so here's the core of the translation for metered execution. Don't worry about the comments on the right-hand side. Joe Denman was just coming up to speed on things. But the main point is that the translation for metered execution is essentially a one-liner. And you get a theorem, which is that if you have an infinite supply of resource, so an infinite amount of gas, that the metered version of the program is bisimilar to the original version of the program. So that's really important because you wouldn't want metering to change the semantics. So you wouldn't want the insertion of gas to change the semantics of, or the execution of the program that you are metering, right? So there was no consideration of that in the design of Ethereum, for example, whereas here it's a theorem that's easily proved. But the main point is that you can use exactly the same technology to do breakpoints, forward stepping and backward stepping. So the whole idea of this translation is that it uses what I call the continuation saturated form. Every Rolang program has a version of the program which is continuation saturated, meaning that you have a continuation that represents the ability to take the next step in the original program. And that's how we introduced metering into the row calculus. So, so along with providing the information about advancing the state, you have to supply some kind of resource, aka a token. And that was the basis for the metering, but you can do, instead of using it for metering, you can use the same trick to go forward in COM events or go backward in COM events. So what you have to do then is to squirrel away all state that's visible to the program at the time before you take the step. And as long as you store the state that's visible to the program just before you take the step, then you can also go backward in time. You can undo the step and restore that state. So again, a debugger for Rolang comes down to a 5-line translation of Rolang programs into debuggable Rolang programs. Does that make sense? Any questions?
I feel that it should be simple, but to understand that, and that is simple, it might take quite time.
Well, the way to understand it is that the apparatus for cost accounting, which basically insinuates itself into every production that doesn't have a corresponding consumption, and every consumption that doesn't have a corresponding production, and every COM event, right? So cost accounting is watching all of those things. So you could do exactly the same thing for a debugger. You watch all of those 3 different kinds of events, and you make sure that, you know, for the namespace that is visible over the lifetime of your program, you are taking snapshots of state, right? And you don't have to do the entire namespace all up front, right? You only have to know what's, in other words, you have to know what are the free names that the program will interact on at the time you're about to make the step. And that's the state you have to capture. And that's sufficient to produce a debugger.
And so that squirreled away state, as you refer to it, is where we get current status of values in channels.
That's correct. So what you would do, so since we have all of the current status in the tuple space, right? When you take a COM event, when you move forward, you're going to change those values. So before you make that COM event, you snapshot all of those values in the tuple space that might change as a result of your step, right? And you store that in another tuple space or in a sub tuple space of the tuple space you're looking at. Then you take your step, right? And so you have the current tuple space, you have the current state of the program, and you have the state that was before you took that step. And that's sufficient to go forward and backward in time.
So basically you create a stack of tuple spaces.
Yeah, it can be a stack or a list or a lot of different data structures, but yes.
So one of the questions that goes through my head is scoping. So in a typical debugger, I'm allowed to see what something is in a given scope.
Yep. So that's the only scope you'll have is the forward comprehension, right? That's the only real. I mean, you also have the new scope, but that can be handled separately. But with respect to the for, if you're about to go into the for, then the variable hasn't been bound. When you do go into a for, that's the COM event, and that tells you what's been bound to the variable.
Well, I'm thinking about persistent reads.
So again, it's exactly the same thing, right? So a persistent read, what really will happen is that you'll fork off a copy of the read, and that will result in a COM event, which will then give you a binding for that variable.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's the whole. So again, the main point is that we have all of the tools that are necessary to build one of the slickest debuggers for concurrent programming ever conceived, right? There's nothing like it in the literature. It's just a matter of who wants to, put their nose to the grindstone and take what's there and turn it into a good user experience. But the mechanism for doing debugging is already there. All right. So unless there are any other questions about that, I will move on. We have been invited to give a keynote presentation online to the Foresight Institute. That will be on the 11th of November at 11 Pacific time. So I would love it if anyone who feels the impulse to attend would attend. That would be great. Also, we will be attending the Foresight Institute's vision session in December. So I will attend that in person in San Francisco at the beginning of December. So any questions about that? To maybe whet your appetite for engagement with the Foresight Institute, one of this week's keynote presentations was one of the principles of SEL4, which is a capabilities-based microkernel. So the principle makes the claim, and it seems to be substantiated, that it is in fact the fastest microkernel on the market. It's open source, and it has been formally verified. They have versions that work for ARM and Intel, and they are currently working on a multi-threaded one. Naturally, that has not been verified. Surprise, surprise. But I think we should look into a compiler from Rolang to their microkernel. That would give us a native capability that is verified down to the hardware level. So then the weak link would be the correctness of the hardware as opposed to the correctness of the stack between us and the hardware. This is in alignment with where we want to go, and that line of effort, that line of work would be, we would learn a lot and make connections with the right people if we were to engage in such an effort.
What's that kernel called again?
It is called SEL4. It's open source. It's on GitHub. And you can look up, if you go to the Foresight Institute talks on YouTube, you can see the talk that he gave to get some engagement. More detail.
Since you mentioned formal proofing, it spurs something in my mind. I remember some time back, there was discussion of formal proofing of a new consensus model. Is there any update on that?
Well, yes, we're good point. So now that our implementation is getting close to the spec, we can begin to contemplate a formal proof for our implementation. So we're waiting for that to complete, and then we can begin the process of doing the formal verification, both in terms of making sure that there's a crisp, clear spec that matches the implementation, and then we can go after the formal verification of the spec as well as the formal verification of the implementation. So it's now visible. There's a tiny dot that might be the end of the tunnel in front of us. Of course, it could be the headlights of an oncoming train, but hopefully it's the end of the tunnel. Any other questions? Great. So we have about 13 minutes left for folks in the community. If you have any issues, questions, comments, something you want to bring before the staff or the board members who are on the call, please come forward.
I'm seeing members channels. There is a hard discussion about about board nominees. Do we have any update on that?
Yes. So there was a lot of overcoming of the language barrier with respect to one Chinese community member's nomination, but that was overcome. The voting was turned, so we do have more candidates than we have seats. Now I know that the community was disappointed that once we had more candidates than seats, there would not be a no vote. But the bylaws are very clear on this point. The bylaws say that if there are less candidates than open seats, then there is a no option on the ballot. Whereas if there are more candidates than open seats, then it's the contest amongst the candidates. And if you, so in that way, abstention becomes your no vote if you really don't want a particular candidate to be seated. So that's how it is written in the bylaws. If people don't like that, we can't change the bylaws at this late state in the game with respect to the election. That would jeopardize election integrity. However, on the other side of this election, I would strongly encourage people who don't like that particular aspect of our governance to get engaged, do the debate and the deliberation with respect to that particular clause in the bylaws, and put together an IOB for consideration by the board. And by the way, IOBs don't have to come along just at the end of the co-op year. They can in fact come along at any time, especially if there's sufficient community support. So if people don't like this particular style of election, which is spelled out clearly in the bylaws, then please get together, debate, deliberate, find a notion of governance that actually works, right? Do some trial runs, see what happens if you run a few mock elections, see what the dynamics are, and then put together a well-reasoned proposal. I am certain that the board will give due consideration to any and all serious proposals. The board has given due consideration to wacko proposals as well. The board takes all such governance proposals seriously and is more than happy to give feedback and hold sessions with members who have concerns. Likewise, there is the governance committee. So that's a resource for people who would like to change the co-op governance. So if you would like to change how the bylaws say we should conduct our elections, talk to the folks in the governance committee. They're relatively well informed about the bylaws. So long answer to your question, but I wanted to make sure that was all there.
How does the change in tabulation affect election results?
So a no vote is essentially counted as a negative vote against positive votes. So a no vote can erase a positive vote, whereas an abstention is not counted as a negative vote. That's the essence of the difference in terms of the dynamic.
That's the answer I was looking for, or at least the explanation I was looking for. Yeah.
Sure. Coolio, any other questions or comments?
I guess I don't know if you can, there was some confusion about Eric in the members channel about Eric
Yes.
joining the board. And I guess what I understand there is that his final decision to join the board was after the deadline.
Yeah, so unfortunately, he came forward, then he withdrew, he came forward, then he withdrew. And during that time, he made some statements to the board about what his intentions were if elected, that undermined the whole point and process of the election. So, you know, unless or until that matter is clarified, we can't put him on the ballot. So, but we're running out of time. So, you know, we have to take these electoral processes seriously. They're not light. And if we go back and forth, if we waffle, it throws a monkey wrench in the whole process. And as you can see from Ian's demo, and this is not exactly simple. I mean, it's a lot simpler than it used to be, but it's still not exactly simple. And there is a burden on the staff and the nominating and the governance committee and the board in terms of making sure that these elections follow a process that is in accordance with the bylaws. So we you know, too much up and down, yay and nay, it puts undue burden on all of those people. So we have to, well, you know, we have to kind of hold the line with respect to the process. I mean, I, for one, would love to see Eric on the board. I know Daryl has expressed quite openly that he enjoys Eric's engagement on the board. I think many of us would like that. So it's, I regret that the communications were so back and forth in that way.
Yeah, still a little fuzzy. I mean, is it true that, you know, he was saying, well, he would run, but he wouldn't serve?
I don't feel comfortable talking about that. Please talk to Eric.
Yep.
Please, you know, you can get it from the horse's mouth.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Unless there are any other burning questions or comments, I will say that we have a lot of interesting things going on business-wise as a result of the Dubai trip. And I will not talk about them here in this venue, but I will talk about them and rely upon your good, you know, all of the good collective intelligence in the co-op to help us navigate the opportunities that are opening up for the cooperative. So please make the Friday session if you can. We can use all the help we can get, because the next few weeks are going to be pretty amazing for the co-op if we successfully navigate this sea of opportunities. So with that, please stay safe, stay warm, and see you on the other side.